Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam, and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that connects you with the best movies to stream, and today we're going to be talking about a bunch of great movies that Prime Video is adding in August 2022. So Prime Video is actually adding a lot more movies in August than they normally do, including a handful of really recent releases that I actually liked a lot. Those get added later in August, but on August 1st they add a ton of great movies that I absolutely love that have not been on Prime Video for quite a while, starting with AI, artificial intelligence. Now this was directed by Steven Spielberg, but he collaborated with Stanley Kubrick on this, and they were actually going to co-create it, co-direct it before Stanley Kubrick died. And while it does feel like a Steven Spielberg movie, there are some little Kubrick touches in there that are actually really interesting, making this what I consider to be one of the most underrated sci-fi movies of all time. Now, I'm not saying it's one of the greatest, but it really is underappreciated for how good it is. This is essentially a modern day, or I guess futuristic, telling of the story of Pinocchio, and I think it fleshes out the themes a lot better than the animated Disney versions do, and there's even more meat on the bone. Yet this movie can be oddly upsetting at times. It upsets you in ways that are very unusual. I mean, it's about an animatronic boy, yet there's feelings and things that get attached to this character, largely because of Haley Joel Osment's performance, but also Spielberg's directing. Again, one of the most underrated sci-fi movies ever made. If you haven't seen it for quite a while, trust me, revisit it. It's well worth rewatching on Prime Video. Another underrated movie that I absolutely love that is just balls to the wall action is 3,000 Miles to Graceland. In this movie, Kurt Russell and Kevin Costner are two heavily armed Elvis impersonators that knock off Vegas casinos. This movie has tons of really excellent shootouts in it, and then it sort of turns into a road movie. Courtney Cox is in the mix. It's actually one of my favorite movies I've ever seen her in, and it is really cool to see Kevin Costner and Kurt Russell playing these real badass Elvis impersonators. This movie's got an unusual flair to it that I absolutely love. It is extremely violent though, and starting to feel a little bit dated, but that's also kind of what's cool about it. But an even better action movie with shootouts and some of the best car chases ever put to film is Ronin. I've talked about the car chases in this movie at length on this channel before, so I won't bore you on this video, but it really does have some of the best orchestrated car chases in a movie of all time. Doesn't mean they're the most dazzling, but they're the most technically proficient, and they really are a marvel to watch, and they go on for an incredibly long time considering how real they feel in this movie. Not only that, but you get a fantastic sort of crime espionage thing with this flick as well. For any fellow Nicolas Cage fans, they're going to be adding two of his best movies, Face Off and Leaving Las Vegas. While I absolutely love Face Off, it is a silly action movie. It's over the top, it's John Woo. His style feels very odd today, whereas it felt incredibly cool back when this came out. As much as I love John Woo, his style does feel very odd and almost forced when you watch it today. However, if you lean into that when you watch Face Off, you're guaranteed to have a great time. And then Leaving Las Vegas is the movie where Nicolas Cage won an Academy Award for Best Performance. He plays an alcoholic going to Las Vegas to drink himself to death in this movie. Elizabeth Shue does a great job playing this prostitute, and they fall in love, and it's a really unusual love story. This is a downer of a movie. If you've never seen it, make sure you're in the right mood when you watch it, but it happens to be one of my personal favorites in this genre. But speaking of classic movies, they're also adding the classic Western Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Aside from a few 60s aesthetics that really stand out in this movie and make it feel dated, this is an incredible film that doesn't feel as dated as it is. But all of the classic Western stuff, the train robbery in the beginning, all the bank robberies and getaways, all of that stuff feels so fresh and incredible. It really is a highly rewatchable movie. If it's been a while since you've seen it, it has held up as one of the best Westerns of all time for a reason. However, my absolute favorite Western of all time, hands down, is also coming back to Prime Video, Once Upon a Time in the West. This was directed by Sergio Leone, who's most famous for doing The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and a bunch of really fantastic westerns. I happen to think this is his best work, though. It's got some incredible characters and some fantastic actors, including Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson. Honestly, the opening 5 minutes of this movie is one of my favorite openings to a movie ever. If you're a fan of Quentin Tarantino's work and you've not yet discovered Sergio Leone's work, at least beyond The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, this is a fantastic example of a movie that definitely has inspired modern-day filmmakers. Clint Eastwood stars in my next pick, but it's not a western, it's Escape from Alcatraz. Eastwood is obviously in some of Sergio Leone's most famous movies, but this movie actually came out the same year as Once Upon a Time in the West, 1979. This is based on the true story of supposedly one of the only successful escapes from Alcatraz. While there are better prison movies, I'm not sure there's a better prison escape movie. There's some great ones and there's some great prison movies with great escapes, but this is a fantastic escape movie. If you prefer people who put criminals behind bars instead of watching them get out, then my next pick is probably for you, Serpico. Al Pacino plays Frank Serpico, who was a real New York City cop that uncovered a lot of corruption in the police department during the 60s. And this true story is really brought to life by Al Pacino's performance. The movie here is pretty good, but you're really watching it to see Al Pacino play Frank Serpico. He does a fantastic job. It's not his greatest performance ever, but it's still a solid effort from him and a true and somewhat important story to watch. And then if that's not for you, you find Dirty Cops to be more entertaining, you're gonna wanna check out my next pick, Filth.
Bingo.
James McAvoy plays a Scottish policeman who is not only filthy, he is just a downright awful human being. But the interesting thing about this movie is the way that it was filmed. There's all sorts of weird things happening because James McAvoy's character is always on a bender, he's on coke, he's drunk as a skunk, and again, doing awful things that are sort of brought to life in this really colorful way. Meaning Filth has a very odd tone considering how debaucherous some of the content can be, but this is a gnarly flick. It's got a really cool role from James McAvoy as well as some other fantastic character actors. This movie actually reminded me a lot of movies like Trainspotting, so if you're a fan of that stuff and you've never seen Filth, check it out, but you've been warned, there's some weird stuff going on in this one. They're also adding a fantastic war movie that actually depicts the first battle that Americans faced in the Vietnam War, We Were Soldiers. This is a combat movie from beginning to end almost. There's a little bit of setup, you introduce some characters, and the soldiers end up out in this valley that they basically can't escape from for the next 2 hours of the movie. I mean, Mel Gibson has been in and made some fantastic historical dramas, and I think the greatness of some of those has overshadowed how good We Were Soldiers actually is. Now, if all that's too heavy for you, you want a good solid romantic comedy, 500 Days of Summer happens to be one of my personal favorites because of how unique and interesting it is. Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Zooey Deschanel star in this, and there are tons of really fantastic, fantasyful things that take place, including a little bit of a musical number. Don't get scared off, it's not a musical movie whatsoever, but there's all sorts of creative, quirky things happening in this movie to help deliver a pretty solid love story that does not go in directions you're used to seeing in a romantic comedy. I even hesitate to call it one because it's really not. However, it's a little romantic, it's a little bit funny, but it's an all-around really good movie. If you like dumber comedies though, like me, then Kingpin is getting added.
As a bowler, I know that right about now, your bladder feels like an overstuffed vacuum cleaner bag, and your butt is kind of like an about to explode bratwurst.
Hey, do you mind? I wasn't talking when you were bowling.
Was I talking out loud?
The Farley brothers went on to direct this immediately after the success of Dumb and Dumber, and if you ask me, I think it's every bit as funny. Bill Murray is an absolute gem in this movie. I mean, I am a big fan of Woody Harrelson and Randy Quaid. They both carry this movie. It is really their movie, but it is one of the most underrated Bill Murray performances of all time. I would watch an entire series based on him playing Big Earn. If it's been a while since you've seen Kingpin, trust me, it's got more laughs in it than almost anything being produced today. I could say the same thing for my next pick, even though it's not quite as good of a movie, Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story. Now this one I find absolutely hilarious, but every single joke is really dumb and really silly. If you're a fan of movies like Airplane and you never saw this, Jim, trust me, it's gonna be one of your new favorite movies.
It doesn't say Cox, unless I say it tastes like Cox.
But if you don't like that sillier humor, I've got two lesser known thrillers that are getting added, starting with Undertow. Now this is directed by David Gordon Green, who would go on to do Pineapple Express, some other comedies, most recently the new Halloween movies, but Undertow is an incredibly underrated thriller from the early 2000s. Jamie Bell actually plays the son of a Georgia pig farmer in this movie, but there's a lot more going on under the surface in Undertow. Josh Lucas does a fantastic job playing his sort of deviant uncle recently released from prison. There's some family gold in the mix, and it turns into kind of a runaway chase of a thriller movie. Despite what you see here, it is shot really well. This is an older, lesser known movie. It's very hard to find high-res footage of movies like that. But still, this is a solid thriller. If you've never seen it, it's one of my top picks for things getting added this month. And I could say the same thing about The Machinist, starring Christian Bale. Now, this movie's a little bit more well-known because of the dramatic weight loss Christian Bale underwent. In fact, this is what he looked like in The Machinist, and then this is what he looked like in his very next movie, Batman Begins. It's wild stuff, and it's all completely real. He starved himself to portray this character, and the reason he looks so gaunt is the mystery that The Machinist holds, and it is a fantastic, dark ride of a movie. It reminds me a lot of like a modern day telling of a Twilight Zone type story. So fans of things like that, if you've never seen The Machinist, it's going to be one of your favorite things they're adding this month. And then before talking about the new releases they're going to be adding later in the month of August, there are two underrated horror movies getting added this month, starting with the 2011 remake of Fright Night. The original is a 1985 classic, and the remake is long forgotten, but still a gem of a remake.
That guy, your neighbor?
Jerry.
Yeah, he's a vampire.
That is a terrible vampire name, Jerry.
It actually stars Anton Yelchin as the lead. He does a fantastic job in this movie. He's always sort of this secondary character, yet he was one of my favorite actors before he died. He died way too young, but this is one of the few chances you get to see him in a really great leading role. And then Colin Farrell plays a pretty good vampire in this movie as well. You also get David Tennant doing this sort of Chris Angel wannabe type thing, and it's really funny. There's some fantastic moments in this. It's a shame that this one has been forgotten with time, but that often happens when a remake doesn't match the tone that people come to expect from the original. And then I consider The Exorcism of Emily Rose to be one of the best Exorcist movies, at least one of the most underrated ones ever made. Now obviously The Exorcist holds up as not just the greatest, but one of the greatest horror movies ever made. However, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, while it's not as good as The Exorcist, it is miles better than most exorcism movies. Tom Wilkinson is always great. He is particularly good as the exorcist in this movie. And then Jennifer Carpenter does a great job playing the Emily Rose character. She, too, is rarely a lead. She's fantastic here. This one is PG-13, so it's a little neutered for an exorcism movie, but still manages to be really terrifying for a PG-13 horror movie. Alright, now I promised some new releases, and there's some of the bigger new releases of the year, starting with Licorice Pizza, which they're going to be adding on the 5th. Now, this is Paul Thomas Anderson's latest movie, and I've yet to talk about it here on the channel because it's only just now becoming available to stream, at least included with a platform. This is a walk and talk movie. It's about two people becoming friends, developing a relationship. That is it. There's not a lot of action in this to speak of, but it is very cleverly written and directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. If you're a fan of his work, this is a must-watch, but I will warn you, it may not hit you on the first viewing. It is pretty dry compared to a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson's work, but I have a feeling it will grow on you if you're a fan of his work. If you don't like walkie-talkie type things, this movie might bore you. I happened to love it, but I particularly loved Bradley Cooper's performance in this movie. He's only in the movie for a few minutes, but he steals absolutely every scene that he's in.
Do you know who my girlfriend is?
Barbara Streisand?
Barbara Streisand. Sand.
Sand, yeah, like sands. Like the ocean, like beaches.
Rubberside sand.
No, like stray sand.
Sand.
It is one of my favorite characters he has ever portrayed, but do not be waiting for it because he's not going to show up till late in the movie. That said, there are some really fantastic performances here, even if they feel a little bit dry and almost too natural. Paul Thomas Anderson managed to make it all work really well. Again, fans of his work, this is gonna be a must-watch for you. And then on the 10th, they add, honestly, one of my favorite movies to have come out this year so far, Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Now, I will tell you, I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. It's one of the reasons I like this so much because it is a wild adventure movie that is totally kid-friendly. I enjoyed the first Sonic movie with my son. It's an okay movie. The second one, though, dials up the action to 11. It is one of the most action-packed movies I've ever seen that, again, is kid-friendly. It's got some funny moments. Some of the characters that seemed forced in the first one are more fleshed out and have funnier dialogue in this one. And Jim Carrey is doing something different than he did in the first movie. He's kind of returning to that rubber-faced 90s Jim Carrey that we all loved from movies like The Mask and Ace Ventura. He's doing that here, and it's fantastic. I absolutely love seeing him return to that. He kills it. He's having more fun on screen than I've seen him have in years, and it's just a wild, fun movie to watch. I've seen it a few times already this year. I mean, it's probably not going to make it into my top 10 of the year or anything, but as far as family movies go, this is easily going to be one of the best of the year. Another one that's packed with a lot of unexpected action is The Lost City, starring Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum, in what is essentially like a Romancing the Stone remake. Now, it just so happens I recently watched Romancing the Stone, and I will say that movie does not hold up very well, but The Lost City is certainly a modern take. Not only is there more action in it, but you get a fantastic cameo from Brad Pitt. He's done cameos a few times over the years. This is one of my favorite ones I've seen him do, and Channing Tatum is really funny in this movie. I've enjoyed his work for years. He's often really funny, but particularly funny in this movie, and Sandra Bullock is great. I mean, she carries the movie. She was always so funny in so many movies for so long, and then she went on this real serious stretch for a bit where all of her funny movies really sucked. This one stands out, though, as one of the best comedies she's done in probably over a decade. And it's worth noting that Daniel Radcliffe has a fantastic role as the villain in this movie. He kind of chews up the scenery in a bit, but in the best way possible. On the 12th, they add A League of Their Own. It's just worth noting. It's a fantastic movie, especially one to watch with young kids. There's a little bit of language in it, but it'd be really cool to watch this historical movie about women entering the world of baseball. Tom Hanks is fantastic. Again, this would make for a great family night if your kids are maybe a little bit older than mine. I'll also mention on the 20th, they're adding the 2014 remake of RoboCop. Far from one of my favorites. In fact, this movie kind of exemplifies what I don't like about remakes. They took this rated R classic that is just incredibly graphic, and they neutered it into a PG-13 movie that blends in with every other PG-13 action movie out there, but it was sort of the last of a dying breed. I know they still make PG-13 action movies, but they really have been leaning in to the hard R-rated action movies lately, and I think this movie just kind of came out at just the wrong time. And then finally, on the 26th, they're adding a brand new Amazon original action movie starring Sylvester Stallone called Samaritan. And it's actually from director Julius Avery, who is most known for directing the movie Overlord, but he did another one called Son of a Gun that I actually really like and recommend, so I'm excited to see his next movie. Sylvester Stallone plays the Samaritan, a superhero that was long considered dead from like a battle 20 years ago, yet he's sort of living on the streets. It's an interesting concept, looks like it could be pretty well done, especially for a quote-unquote made-for-TV movie, but I'll be checking it out, and you can be sure if I recommend it, I'll be letting you know here on the channel. But if you're new here and you're still watching this video, definitely consider clicking that subscribe button and the little bell icon. That way you get notified when I put out videos just like this one, so you never run out of good movies to watch. But I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this Prime Video episode, and you will see me on the next one.